subdivision, I guess, or portion of the International Association of Fire Chiefs. So Pat comes here with a lot of credentials, and as you heard, he has a Minnesota connection. He started his career here, and I'm sure he'll fill you in on some of those highlights.
Well, I'll be brief on that. But, did everybody get their wishes last night at the Oscars? Did your favorite movie win? That's what I really want. That's what I came here tonight to find out. I wanted Il Postino to win. I don't know if you saw that. Just an excellent film. That was my favorite. I mean, yeah, the star died, you know, within hours, literally, after finishing the film. But it was a great little film, and I kind of disappointed it didn't win. But, Bravehearts is a good movie. How many have seen Bravehearts? Okay, a few people saw it. It'll be back. Well, I'll tell you about my Minnesota connection. I spent 23 years in Minnesota. I graduated from Purdue University, not in engineering, oddly enough, but in the arts, in sociology, and came up here to get a master's degree at the University of Minnesota. And when I was a graduate student over in Falcon Heights, living there, I joined the Falcon Heights Fire Department in 1970, February of 1970. Spent 4 years there, and at the time I wrapped up my master's degree, and instead of going on to be a sociologist, I actually went to work for the city of Richfield as a firefighter. And I was a member. If you look back in the old records, you're going to see that I was a member of this group way back when we went over the Midway area years ago. Spent a few years as a chief, actually quit and ran an ambulance company, a private ambulance company in Minneapolis for a few years. And at that time, that's when I came to Roseville. I was a firefighter here for several years. So I've got a lot of connections back here, and raised a family in Roseville. And boy, I tell you, after this meal, I sure do miss the Lido. That was one great dish. I don't know if you've ever had the lasagna with chicken in it. I hope they still do that here. It's just a tremendous dish. That sauce was, I eat pasta probably twice a week. I went down to the Kansas City area as a fire chief again, but I've been a long time proponent of built-in fire protection. That's one of the reasons I was a member of this group. And I had the good fortune of being a participant in the movement for what was then called Appendix E to the Uniform Building Code, the Minnesota Uniform Building Code, which is now, I think, Appendix Chapter, well, it's not 38 anymore. It's going to be Chapter 9 these days because they went to the VOCA format. And it's always been a high priority of mine to manage community fire risk with built-in fire protection. I had no choice in Richfield when I went back there as a chief in 1979. The city obviously landlocked. The tax base had deteriorated because all of the kids had moved out. But we still had a structural fire problem. And I had fewer and fewer firefighters. And I pushed the heck out of getting sprinklers put in. And over time, we did a pretty thorough job. That really was a start, I think, of me really getting solid behind this. Well, I now work for the International Association of Fire Chiefs. I'm just going to give you a little 10-second tour of this. I apologize to those in the back. It may be a little difficult for you to see. Just let me give you a little tour of OLS. I am a part of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, but we are actually a consortium. We have private contributors as well as the federal government. I have 3 contracts right now going with the federal government. And the International Association of Fire Chiefs gets in some money. And basically, I go around the country and assist fire departments on using built-in fire protection, whether it's early warning, sprinklers, mainly sprinklers, but a lot on fire alarms and detection. And I was just mentioning at the table here, a lot of carbon monoxide detection in the past year, because it just kind of fell into residential protection itself. We do a lot of public awareness programs. I'm going to talk a little bit about those and the things that we're coming up with, because what I want to feature is the new stuff in sprinkler technology. I will guarantee you tonight is not going to be easy for some of us in this room. Some of the things that are coming up are, quite frankly, anxiety-provoking. We don't know where the industry is going to go, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm not proposing anything in particular, but as you'll see as we get down the road here a little bit, we got some real important things that are going to happen to fire protection in this country. And it won't be done the same old way in 10 years from now, I'll guarantee you that. Just to show you here, why am I in Kansas City when the fire chiefs are in Fairfax, Virginia? I could say they don't like working with me. But I travel a great deal. It was just easier for me to stay in Kansas City when I went to work for them. So that office in Kansas City is actually my home. If you need the phone numbers or anything later on, I do have some cards, and I'll get those out to you. And I'm the only member of the IFC who does not work out east in Fairfax, Virginia. Boy, we have one fire department person here tonight, right? Any more? Yeah, well, it's not unusual, as you know. I know when I was a member of the group years ago, I think there were maybe 3 or 4 that would attend. But with the installers and the insurance industry here, I think you're going to find some interesting facts here about residential sprinklers. What I want to do is talk briefly about where we are right now with residential sprinklers. Mainly 1 and 2 family homes, but also includes multifamily. And I want to talk a little bit about the problem we face. Why haven't we done better? Real quickly, I mean, everybody's aware of this. I think maybe I'll start to get some hackles up right now, I expect. Obviously, lower death and injury rate. Property loss, I've got some data from Scottsdale, Arizona that just finished a 10-year study of their sprinkler program. If you're not aware of their experience, in 1986, Scottsdale said they were going to sprinkler everything. And so since that time, they have really compelling information about what you can save in lives and property with residential sprinklers. And lower construction costs, smaller mains, fewer hydrants, narrower streets, but the bottom one, if there were a lot more fire departments in here, they'd probably be walking out or at least very, very concerned. We haven't talked much about this, but there is in fact something to be gained economically for cities if they have a sprinkler program. And we kind of danced around it, but the plain fact is we do not need fire suppression-oriented departments in cities that are by and large sprinkled. And Scottsdale's coming out to be a very good example. But there's only one fire guy, and like you said, I led him into a fire. His first one, and he lived, so obviously he's not going to be angry with me tonight. But that's just an intro into the fact that we're going to start addressing this issue because we have to. We've got to talk to the fire service about becoming more efficient. Can you think of any institution left in this country today that has not been called upon to become more cost-efficient, cost-effective? You're all private sector people. You certainly have had that experience. And by golly, the government's having that experience. I do spend a good amount of time in Washington, D.C. Because the office is out there. And a lot of people are feeling the downsides of moves to efficiency. The fire service, so by and large, has been protected from that. I don't think that's going to last. Here are the numbers. I've got to keep my whistle wet here. Flying drives me up. Here are the numbers I show people. What do you say? If you have smoke detectors in your home, you've increased your chances of survival by 47%. If you didn't have smoke detectors but had sprinklers, you've increased your chances by 67%. What we promote is both. And you've increased your chances, conservatively speaking, by the way. This is John Hall's data from NFPA, by 82%. Conservatively, 82%. I would feel very comfortable in pushing that well over 90%. But as you know, there's no such thing as zero risk. There will be fire scenarios where anything will fail from time to time. But we know that from experience. That's a pretty good track record. You know, we've had residential sprinklers since 1981. And with that kind of life safety record, why don't we have more? How many homes in the country do you think, what percentage-wise do you think have sprinklers in them? Including apartment buildings?
Including parts of it.
Yeah. Between 1% and 2%. The first listed sprinkler head was produced in 1981. We've got, what, 277 or some odd number of listed heads for just about every situation except my house. I still can't find one there. I got a different situation I'm working on. I did regular 13 system. 2%. With that kind of track record, 2%. Why on earth, after all these years, have we done so poorly? And I have to characterize that. Well, it's easy to rationalize this. It really is. Opposition from the builders. We have had active opposition from the building community from day one. Those of you who go way back, and Dr. Berg, it's great to see you. I was one of her students at one of the first hazmat classes over at Hennepin County. When smoke detectors were introduced, the builders didn't want them. They argued, hammer and tongs against it, aren't things? Well, the same arguments they used against smoke detectors, they are now using against sprinklers. And guess what? They're really fond of smoke detectors and think they're just the best things a sniff of beer. Well, that's one reason. That's great. Okay. I put fire service ambulance up there right along with it. And if you have any questions or you want to know more about that, I'd be happy to share that with you tonight. As a firefighter and fire chief, having gotten through the transition, I think I've got kind of a handle on it. I'm very disappointed that the fire service is ambivalent about it. But if you have any questions about that, let's talk about it. We have never marketed sprinklers, really. If you look, where do you see sprinklers advertised? Not too many places besides Fire Journal. Well, who reads Fire Journal? Well, we do. In a way, we sing to the choir, and we're going to change that. That's one of the things I want to bring out tonight. There's been a change of priorities for us as of last year. Conversely, we don't market to the general public. And we're going to try that. I'll tell you about a couple of things we're going to be doing in the next 90 days that will be available to sprinkler proponents in the residential sector. Cost, of course, you've always heard that. When it was $1.50 a square foot, it was too much. We got it down to $1 a square foot, it was too much. I won't tell you what we got it down to. I think you're going to be surprised how low the prices have come. And it's also going to bring up a little point of contention later on when we talk about these systems that are very, very cost effective. Myself, I don't think that if we get it down to $1 a square foot, I think we'll still get opposition from the building industry. I think that our future lies in convincing the public that they need sprinklers. We can do it. Do you remember the stories about the wind-up heat detector people? You ever have any experience? They may be coming back to the fore. I just was informed that 2020 is looking into smoke detectors, and we'll have a program coming out some Friday evening here in the next few months. And I think if they look hard at all, they'll get into the heat detector thing. Tom, you're very aware of these folks. For those of you who aren't, they have a listed heat detector. It's a wind-up heat detector, and it's listed. It's listed for about a 70-foot area. Pretty good. But they sell these by scaring the hell out of you. Literally. They'll come in and after you're done of an hour, they give you pre-steak dinner and give you about an hour presentation. And they're selling these things for about $200 to $350 each. How many sprinklers could we get in for that? $200 a sprinkler. I mean, literally, that's, if you look at that, that's what they're doing with heat detectors. I would never, ever agree to the sales tactics these people use, but the fact is, I think we can motivate the general consumer to buy sprinklers. By golly, if we can motivate them to buy these wind-up heat detectors for $3,000 a crack, and then when they don't have the money, finance that at 22% interest. And these people are making millions of dollars around this country. We can motivate the general public if we have something. I'm very sure these, let's say for lack of a better word, scallywags, I have to be very careful what I say in public because these people like to sue, and I spent all morning on the phone talking about that. This is something that I thought maybe you have not been familiar with. You got a few fire chiefs that are members, not too many. We haven't been real articulate, really, on what we can do with built-in fire protection. And basically, I'm going around the country doing that. I'm developing a workshop now for the California Fire Service on how they can be more articulate on what they can do with built-in fire protection in their communities. And there are two concepts that I talk about. One is the fire-oriented or fire suppression-oriented. I got a couple overheads I threw together. I'll try to describe this a little better. Basically, every fire station has what is called a first due district. If you have a medical call, depending where you are geographically in the city, you're going to get in somebody's first due district, and they get the assignment. They're also the first arriving engine on a structured fire. But as you'll see in a couple minutes, you have to overlap these stations a lot to have an effective network for fire suppression. Because you don't put out a structure fire with one engine or one ladder truck. It takes several. And to get there in a reasonable amount of time, typically we look at trying to get there before flashover. Flashover is the critical event, as you know. Pre-flashover fire, you can handle with a lot fewer people than you can once it goes to flashover. So that's kind of the factor we use. We need larger companies because it's very manpower intensive. And you have less reliance on reserve capacity. By reserve, I mean Roseville's a paid-on-call department, a couple sleepers at each station, one on the initial call, but everybody else comes from home. That's your reserve capacity. Fire suppression-oriented departments typically have enough fire stations that they use their on-duty people for their reserve capacity. You don't see Minneapolis calling back people once every 10 years, perhaps, or something, okay? The reason they can do that is they got a lot of fire stations, a lot of firefighters. The other end of the curve then would be an EMS-oriented. If you can picture this in your mind, typical like in Minneapolis, if I can use them, nobody's here, so I guess I can. You can spread your stations out where they don't overlap anymore. You know, in the private sector, that's cost efficiency. Okay. Less unit cost for what you're doing. Smaller companies, most EMS calls you can handle the vast majority with 2 people. Whereas in a suppression oriented, you have 4 or 5 people in a company. And more reliance on reserve capacity because you're not having the amount of fires that go on past flashover that you got to call out the troops and dump a lot of water on. It's really that simple. Let me show you a few things here just to put this in perspective. If you do not have sprinklers in your community, I'm saying nominally don't, okay? You do have structures, but if you don't have a sizable portion of your city sprinkler, here's typically what it looks like. We define a house here as a moderate risk hazard. I usually recommend that we break fire risk into 6 categories, and house fire, single-family detached home ends up right in the middle. Well, you've got a variety of risks around the community, from very high, extremely high to practically nil, and you array your fire stations out and your staff such that you can get to a moderate risk hazard with about 10 to 15 people, with your first unit getting there in about 4 to 4.5 minutes, and everything else getting there in 6. That's the national average, about 12 to 13, okay, plus the supervisor. And so, well, you got 4 and 3 and 3 and 3 around in each station, a lot of overlap to take care of this kind of a fire load. Not using fire load in the sense that you're used to. Why do you need that many people? Well, look what you have to do in a fire. Fighting a fire is just like any teamwork involved. Think about a baseball team for example. You got 9 people out there playing defense. What do you do if somebody hits a fly to right? Does everybody run to right field? They all have duties that they do, and they coordinate their actions to minimize the impact of that fly ball going away. That's exactly what a fire department does. The first duty unit has about 3.5 minutes worth of water, depending on the size of the line they use. As they get their lines pulled and get ready to attack a fire, they can't attack it until they get ventilation started. They may need search and rescue at the same time. Now OSHA says we gotta have a safety crew outside. Right? Somebody has to get there in time to get a water supply going because they're gonna run out of water in 3 minutes. See, here's where you get the coordinated action. And if you're fire suppression oriented, it takes a lot of people to do it right. Now I can tell you about a lot of communities in Minnesota that don't do it right. Okay, Richfield was one. We had 5 people on duty. But it's no fun going to work in fire with 5 people, I can tell you that, because I did enough of it. It's risky business. But typically nationwide, here's what it looks like. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Firefighters are the best paid, but they're well paid. My estimates in Minnesota right now to open a new fire station would run about $750,000 in salary the first year. Of course, that goes on every year. It goes up. Okay. You could round it off to $1 million. I'm not going to spend any time on this. In Mount Risk Hazard, though, there's a list of tasks that have to be done, and typically the number of people that have to do them. Just to give you a feel for the demand on fire protection, and as we're expanding cities around the country and adding on staff and equipment in the traditional manner, we're adding a heck of a debt load to our communities as we go on. Okay. Now see, here's where they start throwing rolls at you. We have fire chiefs in the office. You got sprinklers installed. Here's what you start to look like. You spread stations out, as I said. You staff them with fewer people. And I don't know if you can tell, we're a good little ghost in there. Okay. Essentially, you're providing a higher level of fire protection for less cost. And that's why we are deciding to go ahead and say it out loud. We've been dancing around this thing for years, but you can, in fact, save a whole lot of money every year. I mean, how about that $750,000 up here that you're not spending on here that you could spend for infrastructure, for quality of life items, right? You don't have to spend it on soldiers and tanks. It's a kind of a guns and butter argument. Well, why aren't there more then? What's been slowing us down? I talked about cost. I talked about opposition and who we market to. We've been marketing wrong. Well, let me hit a couple things here that might open some eyes. Let's talk about cost. I just got this with Scottsdale literally last week. They are just finishing up a 10-year study. I have some more data from Scottsdale I can share with you. I don't have it on overheads. In 1986, they had a pretty good piece of the community built up. Right now, they've sprinkled everything since 1986, but they're only about 39% sprinkled. So the whole city isn't covered by any means. I think about 40% of their single-family homes and about 50% of non-residential are not covered by sprinklers. That's going to be an important factor to the production home. We don't know if it was a production or custom, but their 1986 cost, an outside consultant came in for the city. Scottsdale's a private fire department, if you're not aware of that. Has anyone heard of rural metro fire protection? If you even brushed up against firefighters, you've probably heard about the controversy in the Fire Service about private fire departments. Well, in 1951, they started a private fire department in Scottsdale, and it still is. Only this thing is grown. Rural Metro is kind of like Rural Jensen. Okay, it's an institution. They got 3,000 employees, and they're worldwide. And they're publicly traded. And this is where the big threat is. Because they became more efficient by building protection in. It was as simple as that. And look what happened to the cost. When I tell people about this, they don't believe me. But I was there 2 years ago with 60 cents a square foot on production homes, and that's what they're averaging. Okay. Can you beat that at all? I mean, yes.
new construction?
New construction. Yeah, we got some other thoughts about retrofits, but this is new construction. Now, a lot of people say, well, geez, it's cheap labor down there, and there's a variety of reasons why this can happen. Yeah, they've got a lot of merit shops in Scottsdale, but then I've got the same data from the Seattle, Washington area. Okay, where it's basically journeyman shops. About the same, okay? Why is this? I think most of it's competition that's driven the price down. When you start to do this on a pretty large scale, you start to save, okay? So you may not be able to do it very competitively if you're doing one or two, but once you get the ball rolling on this thing, the money starts going down. And I've got another one I want to show you, but I want to talk for a second about half-inch pipe. Right now, the smallest diameter pipe allowed at 13B is 3/4 inch. Okay. Now, see, fire chief's missing. Now sprinkler guys. Now this is a sprinkler guy issue right now. Okay. 3/4 inch pipe is the smallest. The non-metallic people have been experimenting with half-inch pipe, and they've come up with a system that really cuts the cost of sprinklers down. Okay, but it's not your same old sprinkler system. Basically, they cut down on the friction loss problem by they've come out with two new fittings, a 4-way and 3-way from 3-way on the outer perimeter. This is going to be debated at the NFPA conference in May. And if half-inch pipe is approved, under certain restrictions, there are about 9 restrictions that are going to be added on it. You can use half-inch in 1 or 2 family homes. Basically, what they're saying is you can use the sprinkler pipe and combine it, okay, to sprinkle your home. What they're saying is any fitting has to get water from 3 separate directions. And I didn't try to, I could hold up a plate of spaghetti. That's basically what it looks like when you're done. Especially if you have wet trusses and you're staking this stuff all over the place. Basically, though, you've got to have water coming in 3 ways. So if it's a 3-way fitting, all those are coming in. You can have one going out on the 4-way to serve something else. And that's how they get over the friction loss thing. I didn't bring any of the hydraulic calculations with me. Just suffice it to say that it works. They've done 2 prototypes. There was a major debate at the NFPA 13 committee last year, culminating about 3 years of debate on this. And by and large, they were convinced, yes, hydraulically it'll work. And it passed, I think, at like a 22-4 vote. Let's look at a prototype system that they did in Altamont Springs, Florida. They did one in Prince George's County, Maryland, and then just a few months ago did this one in Altamont Springs. 6,000 square foot home. There are the costs. Okay. Materials, both systems, that means plumbing and sprinkler pipe together. 74 hours labor, their rates were 14.5 an hour. Add all that up, put a 32% margin on it for the sprinkler installer, and here's what he or she would charge the whole building. $3,500 basically. But then you back out the cost of plumbing, which you had to put anyway. Okay? Now you're down to less than $1,700 to the builder, 28 cents a square foot to the builder. Now the builder's going to put another profit margin on there. Okay? If you want, you can take that engineering cost out of a production home once you're done with the first model, take that off, it's actually down to 26 cents a square foot. That's pretty darn cheap. But who's going to put them in? Plumbers. It's a combined system. Okay. Now we've got a completely new service delivery method that's coming up to compete with the traditional way of installing sprinklers. And that's going to be a very contentious issue. Okay. So that's what's coming. To buy this at this cost, you're going to give it to a different trade. And that's going to be debated. I know Tom is going, I'm going to be there in the middle of the fray in May. This is going to be a very contentious issue. If you got thoughts about it, would like to express them, you want to be at the conference in May in Boston. Okay. Now, whether this price even would get a builder to drop their opposition, quite frankly, I don't know. But these are the two big issues. Now, what are we doing? I don't have any overheads on this. I can shut this off. One thing we're doing, I just got a nice chunk of money from the National Fire Sprinkler Association and the American Fire Sprinkler Association to do a workshop for California fire chiefs. The building industry has been really strong out there opposing their sprinkler ordinances. There were 84 in California. About 10 of them have been rescinded because of political action from the building community. What people don't know is we've adopted about as many, only we don't like to advertise it because, quite frankly, the cities out there want to keep a low profile. But I was told the entire Monterey Peninsula, which I think has maybe a dozen different fire districts, adopted some regulations. So net-wise, we're probably even ahead of the game, but the perception is that California's losing badly. So I've got a grant to do a workshop out there, but at the same time, we're doing a video for the general consumer. And quite frankly, we have never addressed the general consumer on these before. One reason the ordinances are being rescinded in California. Take some of these cities, Rancho Cucamonga is one. Heck, most of the cities probably sprinkler. But you know, with the housing turnover, everybody who bought those homes didn't buy them new. They moved into these homes. They have no idea what they have in their homes. They really don't understand or appreciate that. We've had enough myths about residential sprinklers to choke a horse, and we were constantly, a big part of my work is going around trying to refute these things. We're going to do a video. It's going to be about 10 to 12 minutes. It's going to be professionally done, and we're going to have it ready so that you can take it out to the general consumer. Start to make them understand what the value of a sprinkler system is. Get those numbers in front of them, make them understand they're just about guaranteed of getting out alive. They got sprinklers in a house fire. The Scottsdale data I have is tremendous. They've had, like I say, they're a little over a third sprinkled. Now, they have a very, very highly effective fire prevention program. 20% of their budget of the fire department goes to fire prevention. I'd say the next best department is probably spends 5% at most. Okay. They are spending a lot of time and effort on this. And it's showing. They have about 1/3 the number of fires. Their loss is very small, even a non-sprinkler. And it's not all 1 and 2 family buildings down there anymore. There's some huge resorts. They do have high rises. Non-sprinkler, they're averaging about $17,000 per fire. Sprinkler is $1,945. Now, nationwide, we talk about if you have a sprinkler home, your fire loss is going to be about 1/3. Okay, these are estimates. But now that we're getting data and evaluating a program that's got a significant number of buildings sprinkled, we're finding out it's a whole lot better. A whole lot better. They pulled out their arson fires where flammable liquids were used. The worst loss was $15,000. And this is one where somebody poured gasoline all over the place. Sprinkler systems, even as a life safety system for residential applications, are extremely effective both for life safety and property loss. So we are going to be taking that to the general public. Now, there's a downside to that. That's great if you're in an area where you're building a lot of homes, but if you're not, we got 100 million homes, or 110 million already here. And I don't know what we're going to do if we motivate people to want sprinklers, but we don't have a way for them to put them in existing homes. But that's an issue that's down the road that really is going to have to be addressed. So what we're going to do for the video is target in areas where they're building. And target areas where they have sprinklers so they understand what the importance is and that they can then hang on to their ordinances, hopefully. The other thing we're doing, that addresses the how do we get these things marketed. We are going to market differently. Fire departments, though, are still a significant issue. And I have to say quite candidly that we're going around the fire departments, and we're going to policymakers. We now have an exhibition booth at the International City Managers Association, League of Cities. There's a county association, Governors Association. We are going to policymakers to make them understand the economic impact, the positive economic impact residential sprinklers can have. Because a lot of times, quite frankly, the story just isn't getting out. It's not getting told. And I know I'm going to anger a lot of fire chiefs around the country. I don't want to get into it tonight. I understand why fire chiefs and firefighters are ambivalent about sprinklers, and I guess I could even use a stronger word than ambivalent, but let's leave it at that. You hear stories, well, they're afraid of losing their jobs. Well, quite frankly, I don't know that there'd be more than a handful of firefighters so hard-hearted that they would actually say that they just would see a few people die to keep their job. It's something else. It's about a whole lecture in itself of why it's tough to get around that. But we have to. The sprinkler story is just too good. You know, there just doesn't make sense to spend the millions of dollars we do. I mean, totally we spend about $47 billion on fire protection in our country. Fire service is one of the last bastions of inefficiency. It may be effective to some extent, but it is very, very inefficient. You pay for that, okay, that overlap. And that's what we're going after. Well, those are the two messages I wanted to kind of bring you up to date. Not a heavy technology thing tonight, but I sense that there's going to be some major changes in our country. And the built-in fire protection is going to play a very, very strong role in how we manage our fire defense in the future. Any questions? I'm open to anything on residential sprinklers, CO, whatever. Yes?
A number of years ago, I attended some workshops where Harry Shaw was talking about the possibility of coming up with a 60-gallon pressurized tank for rural homes.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that?
Oh, well, number one, Harry Shaw's alive and kicking. In fact, he's carrying the water on this sprinkler proposal for NFPA. We're looking at a couple things that they're not ready to be discussed yet, but one thing we're working on is a pre-engineered system. Harry had some data he talked to me the other day about you get up to 16 heads. If you got enough water to turn on your faucet, you'll have enough water to get those sprinklers going hydraulically. The stored water for rural applications, we haven't found a real inexpensive way of doing it yet. There are 3 systems, I think, available. One's what we call the 3D system, which is the poly water tank and a motor to pressure it. And then the other 2, I think, use hydrogen. Franz Haas out east has one. Life Safety Systems. There's one out in Ralph Crane on the west coast that has one. They run about $3,000. Now, they're pretty expensive. Now, I do a newsletter, by the way. I should have brought some copies. We send out every month about 10,000 people around the country. And it's mostly about sprinklers. And I did a story last year. I did Mr. Brace's Smina. You might remember, maybe not remember the story, probably heard my reports about how it hurt. And I got it done. I did a front page article on the North Slope borough of Alaska. These people are isolated. I mean, if you want to know what isolation means, you got to go up there. The North Slope is the whole top half of Alaska. Barrow's up there, where they're getting all the oil right now, Prudhoe Bay. There are 8 villages in this place, and the North Slope is as big as California. Now, if you could imagine the state of California, just close your eyes for a second and imagine in your mind's eye the entire state of California with 8 villages and no roads in between. That's the North Slope. Now, all the oil money started coming in, so the borough council is like a county. The North Slope borough is technically a county. They said, we got to use this oil, money for fire protection, so they bought everybody a fire truck. Like a volunteer fire department started, and of course, when they had a house fire, that simply wasn't enough. There's no mutual aid. There's nothing. The volunteer firefighters said, there's got to be a better way. Because man, it's expensive to build homes up there. You got to fly everything in. It's extremely expensive. I mean, these, when you talk about a single-family home, I don't know that the worst fishing shack cabin I've ever seen in Minnesota. It's probably twice as good as what these people build up there. It's very utilitarian. So they got one of the FEMA sprinkler trailers up there, and they did a demonstration, and so the borough council said they're going to put money into it, and so far I think they got 3 or 4 of these 8 villages completely sprinkled. Well, here's how they're doing it. One, they don't have water, municipal water. Every home has a water tank, about a 200 or 300 gallon tank in their home. And twice a week a truck comes by and delivers potable water to them. Space is, real premium. If you're spending $150, $200 a square foot for a shack up there, you don't want to be putting 30 minutes of water in someplace. That's really valuable space. So what they did, they did a 100-gallon tank. They're using CPVC. They run it exposed. Hydraulically it works. And here's how they get their water. Well, the water from the tank, they got a motor on it. And then they got a pipe that goes over to the regular water tank, and they use a toilet plunger float valve. They talk about not listed products, okay? If a head fuses, water starts going down, right? Valve trips, and then they got maybe 150 gallons of water from the other tank. This thing, I had some photographs of it. It's a sight to behold, but it works. They've had about a half a dozen fires in Springfield homes. Practically no fire damage, no lives lost. Invariably, if they had a house fire, it burnt down. If anybody was in it, they died. There was just no other way. So this is it's a real radical extreme of this. To answer your question, it's being worked on. Some ways are pretty innovative, and they sure as hell don't follow NFPA 13D. And I got some messages from the sprinkler associations when I did the article, because we're talking about stuff that doesn't meet code, isn't done, installed according to a standard. But what's happening is some people are showing us that perhaps for homes already built, perhaps rather than keep losing the lives in those 100 million homes, maybe we should look at something other than 13D. It's like, most of it, like NFPA 101, it's got new construction and existing, and the standards differ, and that's one of the issues coming up. Harry's trying to hang on long enough. He's 75, I think, now, and he's hoping to get this half-inch done, but we're working on the existing and the built-in water supply, too, at the same time. Probably 10 times as radical as anything I brought up tonight. I ain't going to touch it tonight. Anything else? Yes?
Yeah, you're talking about the way that they do these homes now, having feed the heads from 3 different ways. Now with all the new types of heads for residential and quick response and large flows, how does that affect the half-inch plan? There's going to be an effect where you're going to need so much water that volume-wise to get through that half-inch, even though you're coming from 3 ways, and even though with the pricing and stuff too, from city to city, pressure is going to vary somewhat as well.
These work pretty well on low pressure. Right now, I think another change to 13D, they wanted to put a minimum pressure, I think, of 8.5 pounds. Some of these were working down as low as 7 pounds. It's going to affect head spacing, obviously. This is not going to work for anything other than a standard home. You're not going to see this in vaulted ceilings and these other applications. Okay. It's going to be pretty much standardized. But it's hydraulically, it's working. Now, the other thing I didn't mention, do you know what a mana block plumbing system is? It's a manifold, basically, where every plumbing fixture has its own line coming from the cold water supply. Okay, so you're not routing around. You want to go to your upstairs bathroom sink, you run a cold water line up there. These water lines that are supplying these heads, so you got a lot of lines. They say it's a better system, I don't know, but it looks confusing. That's why I say it looks like a plate of spaghetti. But you have a lot of water sources that you can tap off and supply these heads. there's been a lot of questions about the hydraulics. And so far, they've shown that, in fact, Mutual, in fact, got a grant for fire administration. Their report has been done, and I haven't seen it yet, but I've been told that it supports this concept that hydraulically it'll work. I don't know what the level of the head spacing. I don't think you're going to see, 16 by 16 or anything like that on it. So it may require more heads.
That's not to see how you could hydraulically make it work, even with a 16 by 16. But each one of these heads is supplied with 3 or 4 pipes, not each pipe.
Yeah, each head, like the 4-way ports, they have to have at least 3 separate supplies. So they can't just tap off a couple different spots on the same one.
I can't see how that could be that much cheaper to install, because the labor to, the dollars for the material is not going to be different than, or maybe it might even be less with the single piece of pipe. But as far as the labor is concerned, you have to deal with that much more pipe. And even though they're 1-inch pipe versus half-inch pipe, and correct me, as anybody else here, but that's the installation is not any different.
Oh, you're entirely right. But see, that's why by using the plumbing pipe, which has to go in, that's where, yes, the net amount of pipe is more.
Oh, this is all plumbing pipe.
They're using plumbing pipe to supply. You see, that's 80% of the pipe right there, which has to be in there anyway. So that's where the big savings is. If it's not a multi-purpose system, it won't work. Yeah, you're right. It'll just be very expensive. Now, one of the other issues I can tell you is the clogging. I mean, your margin for error, if you think about the radius now, depends on these things. You've got a lot smaller margin for error. And that is, frankly, one of the issues that hasn't been resolved. And I don't know if it will until there's just been some field experience. But, to give you a preview what's going to happen in May, that's going to be a very, very important issue.
Okay.
Yes.
Which I'll do for a second here, some of your trials and tribulations on CO detectors.
Well, I do a lot about carbon monoxide. Is everybody affected by the carbon monoxide? Well, you might be by the systems too. If you design systems, what is a hydraulically most remote head? There's no way to tell it. You got to run through every iteration to find it, because there's just no way to tell because of the water supply. So literally, you got to calculate each separate one. Now, the nice thing is with computers, that's not a problem. If you're doing it by hand, it'd never be done. But there may be maybe a market here for those of you that do design, because they're going to have to be calculated. I do a lot of work in carbon monoxide. If you have any questions on that, we've gone from, I think, 370,000 in 1993 when they first came out, to 3.5 million in 94, and a little under 10 million last year. And it's created havoc for fire departments. But we're doing a workshop that goes around the country to train fire departments how to handle it. You and I can chat about that. I don't know if the rest of these folks may not be that. If you're interested in carbon monoxide, yell out, because I'd be happy to get into that too. But, short of that, man, that was one heck of a meal. That paid for my trip right there, so that was fantastic. Consider it done. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions after we're wrapped up, come on up and I'll be around for a while. Thank you.
A couple of
Just as anyone who's reading the paper is coming to a close, and it may well be Friday and it may well be Monday. I think it was a really good session from the standpoint of what didn't pass. And sometimes what is not done may well be as valuable as something that was done. A number of things that we were involved in were certainly the whole fireworks industry issue, legalizing fireworks in Minnesota. And it's never over until signing die, but I believe that we were able to fight off that effort, and it was a combined fire service effort, certainly not just the State Fire Marshal Division. Another bill that would have penalized and caused prompt payment of some questionable claims by the insurance industry was defeated. but with a commitment to go back and look at that whole issue about how fire claims are settled in Minnesota. We had problems with the bill. We felt that it may well be an encouragement for people to set their own property afire because it severely limited the insurance company's ability to try to mitigate the loss. In other words, pay quickly or risk punitive damages or treble damages or so forth. Just a whole host of things. I'd love to sit down with our guest speaker and talk about tonight, but there was a piece of legislation that allowed plumbers to get into the sprinkler industry or into the purview, and that was fairly well bottled up early on, and it did not progress. Interesting enough, it was a state department, not mine, that pushed that. Those are just a couple of legislative highlights for this session. As I say, it's coming to a close, and the fire service did its usual some pension increases. But there's one thing that was that I think was particularly noteworthy is that, and I think it's very, very significant and worth noting, and I'll close on that point. For the volunteer pension, they allowed a provision whereby people who have a public fire safety education interest can become involved in the fire department, not as fire suppression people. In other words, you could go out if you were a chief officer in a fire department, and you could recruit maybe a school teacher or someone else with special skills that has no interest in fire suppression. And you could offer them a place on the fire department, and they would receive a pension just like the fire suppression people would receive a pension. Very, very controversial for Minnesota. And it started out as a one fire department issue. When the gentleman presented it, the legislators got excited and said, well, it's good for this department. Hey, let's make it for everybody. And all of a sudden, what was a one very narrowly crafted bill became a statewide. I think that's close to going through. The important thing about that is once again, keying on some of Pat's remarks, is a non-traditional approach. All you have to do is the city has to pass an ordinance that authorizes such a person to be on the fire department. And we estimate there are approximately 41 cities right now that are lining up to do that. It would be most interesting to follow it. Fun to follow that progress. And the last thing is a bill that passed last year, but it just went into effect on the 1st of January of 1996. And that's a bill that provides a fire escrow account. And I want to follow that one really carefully. It's a little known piece of legislation, but so many of us have seen in communities where an insurance company pays off a claim to an owner, and the owner leaves town, or effectively leaves the building, and it becomes an attractive nuisance, and maybe it has several fires, and health problems, and so forth and so on. 15% of the insurance proceeds go into a escrow account in the city to either bring it up to code or demolish it. Came out of Minneapolis. The first city to try it is Duluth. And it'll be fun to watch and see what happens. Once again, this old tradition is being broken down, and a new paradigm. Always interested in innovation, and certainly my knowledge of your speaker has been for a number of years, and always challenged by your remarks. And it was a real pleasure to be here tonight, Pat. It's always good to have our horizons a little bit challenged and maybe a little broad.
The last point I want to talk about is our next meeting. I'm going to ask Paul to come up and we're going to highlight
the next meeting is going to be a program that we've had a couple of different speakers over the last 2-3 years speak on this, and this has to do with clean extinguishing agents. This next speaker will be Dave Pelton from Ansel, and Dave is out of Chicago, the Chicago office for Ansel, and they market a product called Energen, which is a clean extinguishing agents and inert gas mixture. And if you know anything about the clean agents, we just finished a cycle with NFPA 2001. I'm on the 2001 committee. And we just finished a cycle here, and it should be published here. They're actually a little bit late, which is kind of surprising for NFPA, but they're going to be publishing the new document here, the second edition, this month or early next month, and going into the next cycle, which is a 3-year cycle. In that standard, there are 7 different clean extinguishing agents that are halocarbons, similar to what you have with Halon 1301, and then or I should say 3 different inert gases now. There was originally just one inert gas, and that was Energen, and now there's 2 others, 50-50 mixture of nitrogen and argon, and 100% argon only agent. So you're going to get a little bit of a different flavor of what different type of technology really is, and how you extinguish fires. It's more kind of a cross between clean agents, kind of a cross between halon and CO2, but higher pressure material that is quite effective at extinguishing fires. I think is something that there's a lot of confusion with clean extinguishing agents, and I think it's quite important that we here in this group here have a chance to see a lot of the different technologies. So you've seen the 3M's product, you've seen Great Lakes product, 3M's CEA 410 clean extinguishing agent. You've seen Great Lakes, which is FM 200. Now this one is Ansel's Energen. And possibly for a future program, we might have a newly UL listed FM approved product called FE13. It's a high pressure gas manufactured by DuPont. So there's a lot of different things going on in this particular industry. It's quite interesting. One last thing, there's also a new standard, a new clean extinguishing agent standard being developed by ISO, not Insurance Services Office, but the International Standards Organization, and it's going to be a worldwide standard that encompasses a lot of the different standards around the world, British Fire Protection Association, Australian, NFPA, and so forth, and that's slated to be published in 1997. And the next meeting is over in Kyoto, Japan, to finalize that version. So that's what you're probably going to hear a little bit of what's going on with the clean extinguishing agents from Dave in his talk on Energen.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you for coming tonight, and look forward to seeing you next month. We'll just watch the announcement. I'm sure we're on target for that date that was published in this newsletter. So if things change, we'll let you know. Thanks again.